you know, are they giving more than we would give to the DoD or to the FBI? And we're not really sure exactly what that means, but what we think it means is that in addition to the contracts that we know about, because you can read about these enormous fire hose data contracts that companies like ZeroFox and DataMiner strike with these firms, that they're also getting some kind of direct access to the back end data from Twitter. The other thing is, the analysis in a lot of cases, I think it's dumber than you'd think. Like the FBI clearly in the run up to the 2020 election was just doing straight keyword searches for the date November 4th. They were just doing straight term searches because they were looking for anybody who was tweeting like "vote on Wednesday." In other words, we Democrats, please vote on Wednesday. Republicans, please vote on Wednesday. And they turned in every single one of those people. So there were thousands upon thousands upon thousands of these requests just about that one joke. And then in terms of the foreign agencies, my strong impression is that they're just collecting accounts they don't like and then saying we assess that these are connected to the Internet Research Agency, because they don't seem to have any need to show proof. They just send a piece of paper that says we assess that these are foreign state actors, hostile state actors that are doing cyber operations, and then they'll just send you a big Excel spreadsheet. So what does that mean? I don't know. They also could be getting the subcontractors to do the analysis for them. But I did talk to some people in some of these agencies, and the answer I consistently got was, I would be shocked if the government had the capability to do sophisticated analysis of these things by themselves. So,
well, great. So final question here, Tom. I see you're back. But before you ask, Tom, did you get the Russiagate binder? The FBI, the court ordered them to hand it over on December 31st. Did you get it?
I don't think I got it.
No.
I'm glad you mentioned that, because everyone was tweeting at me about binders, and I'm like, what the heck is this all about? I was waiting for the gun documents from the Secret Service about poor Hunter's gun, but that's another issue. Matt, we really appreciate this. As someone who looks at a lot of documents, and I both envy and don't envy you in terms of, being able to get into this gold mine of information. And I guess, we always want to know what else is out there. And I guess there are a few questions I have in that regard, and disclose as much as you're able. Mm-hmm. I guess specific questions and kind of a general question too. You talk about in the Adam Schiff tweet that, and you may have kind of semi-answered this just a second ago, about all of these individuals who were, you say, an astonishing variety of requests from officials asking for individuals they didn't like to be banned. Mm. That suggests that there were more people than Schiff in terms of the American government that you saw were doing this. Is that a fair characterization, and were there more?
There were more. The reason in some cases I didn't do it because I didn't publicize it because they were talking about accounts that were being genuinely abusive. In other cases, they were former officials, so it wasn't as craven. Like, this was the best example that I could find of somebody doing something that was unequivocally shady, right? But there is, I talked previously about how the way that I'm kind of doing this is that it is, I have this whole list of, set of buckets that I drop all the documents into if any one of them fits. And I do have a bucket for what I call like improper asks. And that's filling up a little bit. And that can be anything. Like, that can be the FBI asking for information that it's not entitled to without a subpoena, or it can be somebody who's a public figure who's making a moderation request that I don't understand yet. And so there's more of those, and there's certainly a lot of high-profile people complaining about stuff. Let's put it that way. There's a couple of people on MSNBC who are quite active in regaling Twitter with requests, but I haven't gotten to the bottom of what exactly those incidents are about yet, so I didn't put those up. But there's more for sure. But the shift thing is the worst one that I've been able to find.
From what I saw, based on my experience at Judicial Watch, there's significant civil and criminal liability issues raised by these documents, not only for the FBI, but, for former Twitter management. And in many ways must be putting his own company head on the block in terms of legal liability here. But what struck me here as well is I kind of want to get your insight as to what your visibility has been into the other companies, Facebook and Google and such, which, comparatively speaking, the censorious impact is exponentially greater at
Right.
Facebook and YouTube. And what insights do you have there as to was there significant pushback? Did you see that this is going to be a massive scandal if expanded to Facebook and YouTube, or is it just I'm interested in your insights there. Thank you.
Oh, thanks, Tom. Yeah, I don't really. We only see it occasionally, like in the planning for things like this industry task force. Facebook shows up a lot. We see Twitter kind of following the lead of Facebook a lot. Um, I guess that's to be expected because Facebook's a sort of a bigger company. Twitter internally, they talk a lot about how their influence may seem outsized because they have so many journalists in the platform. They're pretty cognizant of the fact that compared to Google and Facebook, they're kind of a distant third in terms of real world impact, which is one of the reasons they were upset in the fall of 2017 after being dragged to the Hill, because their impression was that they were grilled the second hardest, with Google a distant third. They didn't think that was fair, but we don't see a whole lot about what Google and Facebook are doing, other than occasionally they show up in communications about the government groups, the sort of joint government groups. And I will say that a lot of these communications have raised questions about, like, is this behavior that you would normally expect to see from competitors? And it doesn't seem like that to me, although, who knows? But it's very strange. But I certainly get the impression that Facebook is the alpha dog in this whole thing.
Well, I'm sure the antitrust division will get right on it.
Yeah, right. Let's all hold our breath.
Thanks, Matt. You've been great to take this much time with us. Tuck those kitties in and keep doing this hard work. And honestly, if you have stuff you want to farm out, shoot us a follow, if you need help or whatever. I think that one of the things that somebody who I'm very friendly with in the journalism space said was, it feels almost like it's kind of funneled and it should be more kind of widespread, the access to this stuff. And I understand why they're doing it this way, so I don't necessarily agree. But if you are overwhelmed and you want a bunch of really damn ass good researchers to help you, there are a bunch of them up on this panel right now. So,
well, thank you. I may take you up on that offer. It's getting to be a little overwhelming. I think I can't speak for Twitter and for Elon, but I kind of understand the media strategy here a little bit. I think it's been, there's been a conscious decision to certainly to keep the story away from, like, mainstream media actors, which I think has been smart. But I don't necessarily see any reason why it can't be expanded to more people. There's more than enough material, so I'll definitely keep that in mind, and maybe we could collaborate some.
fantastic. You have a great night, Hans. I'll let you speak last. It's your space. Goodness.
Well, it's our space. Thanks, Matt. You got your kids, so yeah. Again, thanks so much for your time, being so generous with your time, and maybe we can do it again sometime.
Absolutely. Thanks a lot, Hans. Thanks, everybody. Take care.
Bye, guys.
Thank you.
Hans, do you want to keep going? Because I have so much crap on my mind right now.
Yeah, no, I do as well. Like, so first of all, I think if the stenographers of the world were, doing their job, they would, as journalists, they would listen to the past hour of this, or past hour and a bit, and write a story, because Matt broke a lot of news. I mean, the one that jumps out at me like immediately is, we got all of Jim Baker's emails. I almost fell off my chair here.
Yeah.
It was fantastic. And Matt shared so much amazing information. Not only that, but also about the process. I mean, he basically said that this is a free for all. He has not been kind of blocked in any way, and it's more about the technicalities of getting the info, because there's just so much of it, and he's kind of reduced to these keyword searches. Whereas you really need to be forensic at this point. You need to have a big team, like an accounting firm or whatever, and just literally go through every single email and message and whatever there is.
Yeah, he's basically doing FOIA to Twitter, who's actually responding. Tom knows a little bit about that. I'm glad to be in a space where I can talk to Tom for a minute and not be cut off. That'll be great.
Oh, it's your microphone, Tracy.
Yeah, I mean, look, the thing that strikes me is the Guccifer 2 stuff, because literally what I think it was Fool that was saying before, if you can debunk, in quotes, the Guccifer 2 myth, the rest of all of Spygate implodes upon itself immediately. And one of the things I highlighted in my thread today was the fact that I don't know how many people realize that Jim Comey sacrificed the CIA to keep that under wraps. That's the decision that was made at that high of a level. He was granted, there was an immunity deal being worked out with Julian Assange from WikiLeaks, where Assange was going to hand him where that information came from, and he turned it down in favor of letting the Vault 7 leaks go out. That's massive.
So what do you mean by the Guccifer 2 leaks being a fraud? What explain that to me? I mean, I think I know, but it's been a while since I've been swimming in that.
Yeah, so supposedly Guccifer 2 was a Russian hacker that was responsible for the DNC leaks, which were the first batch before Podesta's email came out, where we learned about how they were pushing out Bernie Sanders and, the internal stuff from the DNC. So this character, Guccifer 2, was, I think, created to be the front for that. And it's woven all throughout the Mueller special counsel investigation. They spend a ridiculous amount of time tracing that back to, Apartment 26, Fancy Bear and Cozy Bear, and trying to make it a Russian op. But it was really kind of spearheaded by CrowdStrike, and that opens up a whole new can of worms. But this Guccifer 2 account was dissected in numerous different ways. There's a boatload of information out there about it. They never were able to come to any conclusion about it in any finite way in the Mueller report, other than to say, well, this is a Russian hacker. But Tom, let me know what you think, and everyone else up here too. A couple months before Guccifer 2 shows up, they go over to Romania and they grab Guccifer 1, who you're very familiar with, Tom, and they bring him back to the United States, and they have him in a room and they question him, and then they hand him a plea deal. He pleads guilty, and they ship him back over to Romania. So they extradited this guy over here to talk to him, to then just send him back less than 48 hours later to go back to jail in Romania. So weird.
Yeah, what we found interesting about that was, some of you may be familiar that we tried to investigate what material was out there on the dark web. The dark web isn't a non-public area in the sense that people can't access it. It's just a difficult to public access area, and you can see elements of hacking activity because materials are posted up there and other things. And one of the things we noticed is that even after there were these arrests of the bad guys supposedly responsible for the hacking is that the servers associated with that activity seem to be active still, and not only in Romania but elsewhere. And we found indications that some of Hillary Clinton's server material may have been hacked by the Russians, and including classified information. And we tried to share that, and we did share that with the FBI through Peter Strzok's operation, and they didn't care anything about it. So I thought it was interesting that they were more, that certain hacks were of interest to them, but others weren't, because obviously if Hillary Clinton's information had been hacked by the Russians, that would have raised the legal liability for Mrs. Clinton in significant ways. So it's curious, but this is all kind of a background for why they didn't want anyone talking about any of this in 2020 again, right? This leaks through into the Ukraine issue, and we see today with Schiff and the impeachment and his desperation to cover up his office's operations against Trump by censoring a journalist, our friend Paul Sperry and countless others. It's an incredible series of documents in that regard.
It's been the same op the entire time. They just shift the reason is basically what it is. Harold, go ahead.
Well, this comes back to not just Jim Comey, but the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence as well, because we both know that Warner's lawyer, Waldman, was also involved in this. They had set up the Queen for a Day arrangement for Assange, which is what Comey killed.
Correct. Yes, Adam Waldman, who also happens to be Johnny Depp's attorney that testified in that defamation case, very odd character, was connected to and signal messaging back and forth with Warner at the Senate Select Committee on the Senate Intelligence Committee, and was also working with Oleg Deripaska, the Russian oligarch, and Christopher Steele at the same time as he was working with Julian Assange. It's a very, very odd chain of stuff.
It almost seems like they thought they were going to get Assange to say what they wanted to blame Trump. But Comey knew beforehand what he was really going to say, and that's why he killed the deal.
And it all hinges on the fact that they were hanging on Russia hacking the DNC, which really I truly believe didn't happen. Undead, go ahead.
And there was no way that they were going to let Comey was not going to let him come here and say that, because it would have killed the Russiagate conspiracy right then and there as soon as Assange opened his mouth.
Correct, which is why they then allowed this. Like Assange basically used Vault 7 as a leverage tool to be able to get around, I won't drop this huge, massive hacking tools file I have on the CIA and Comey ended up killing the whole thing and saying, just release it. And he did. Sorry, Undead, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I just want to jump in to pick up on a couple of points that you referenced. And this goes to a kind of a deeper understanding that's still present throughout the public, in that a lot of people still believe a lot of reliance was placed on the work of CrowdStrike, and it's just not true. You can look at the Exhibit 147, the Sussman trial, and as late as October 2016, they were still asking for the server images from CrowdStrike. But then on October 7th, they actually officially attributed the hack to Russia, and they didn't have anything from CrowdStrike. They had a redacted report that wasn't even completely unredacted. And I mean, through my FOIA work and some of the open records requests that I put in, I think the richest field of mine that is still to come is going to be Manos Antonakakis and David Dagan. And a lot of you might be familiar with those names because they were associated with the Alpha allegations. There's a lot of issues around those Alpha allegations. I don't want to necessarily get into the Alpha side of it, but something that Margot Cleveland and I discovered in the spring was that these two individuals proceeded to go and work for Special Counsel Mueller, which raises a lot of red flags because, as a lot of you will remember, Allison Sands and the FBI they were trying to interview David Dagan the whole time, because he allegedly had written the Alpha Bank white paper that was given to the FBI. So the whole time, he was actually working for Special Counsel Mueller, and these taskings were coming down through DARPA. And just recently, I got a new batch of documents that kind of throw this into a wider controversy. One thing that Jerry Dunleavy did was he got DARPA on record in the spring saying, no, they didn't have anything to do with the hack of the DNC. But records I just received within the last couple of weeks say that they were doing this work via DARPA for Special Counsel Mueller. They were laundering the information, if you will, and maybe that's a poor description, through contacts at DARPA, and then it was going to the Department of Justice and Special Counsel Mueller. And they did work on the attribution for the DNC hack. And that's just a big red flag. You know, I can't say there's something wrong. I can't say there's something illicit or improper, but it is very alarming to me that they are associated with Alpha allegations and they are perhaps responsible for a significant amount of work product around the attribution for the DNC hack. And ultimately, that work product is probably sequestered in the case, in the GRU indictment case that Mueller filed. And that's why it's been protected from congressional inquiries and FOIA. And that's why nobody's known about this.
Correct me if I'm wrong. That all began in the very early days through Brennan, correct?
That's sort of a different side of it. So my understanding through all the documents I've obtained, Manos Antonakakis and David Diggin, they're Georgia Tech researchers. They might be on a different side of this in that the taskings came through the Department of Justice to DARPA to them, and then it flowed back upwards. But there is another side of this, and there are some allegations we have not corroborated that Rodney Joffe also has a role in the attribution and tracing the hack of the DNC through internet sensors that he maintains through Packet Forensics and other companies that he owns. And he has a significant role in the attribution for the DNC hack as well, in tracing the hack back to Russia. So on that side, there are some theories that Joffe might be part of some of the fusion cells that were set up towards the end of 2016 and into 2017. So that's the working theory right now. We really don't have any documents as it relates to Joffe's involvement yet, but that's where I think the next shoes are to drop.
Go ahead, Tom.
Yeah, you know, going back to your initial point, Tracy, about the DNC leaks and such, you know, it's important to kind of be aware of that issue generally. The specifics aside, is that the left and Hillary Clinton and the Obama operation and their allies that remained in place after Trump took office, they weave this theory that but for the hacks, but for that, Hillary would have been president, right? So, and they knew that in the meantime, they were also putting out this fake Russia information. Of course, they needed to maintain that falsehood as well by suggesting that one of the pillars of the Russia collusion smear with Trump, or one of the pillars of Russia's collusion with Trump, were the Facebook bots and Twitter bots and such, right? So the problem that the Trump administration had is that his appointees, being as unimaginative and as fearful as they are, believed all of that, right? They believed that the Russians, quote, interfered in the elections and these hacks were disruptive to the elections. Whether they're hacks or not was beside the point. They just believed it all. And so as a result, the entire intelligence apparatus and community happily said, oh, we're not going to let this happen again. And conveniently, not letting that happen again was also a code for we can't let Trump get elected again. And so all of that we're seeing in the Twitter files was a buildup to protecting democracy, as we now know famously that the outside leftists were pushing. But internally, you had these deep state operatives with the support of Trump appointees who thought they were doing the Lord's work in censoring people based on their theory that Russians were trying to mess with our elections. It's censoring the Hunter Biden allegations using that very basis as well. And it was all designed to prevent the reelection of Trump that they thought was, that should never have happened, at least his initial election should never have happened, but for this internet operation being successful and this Russia operation being successful to get him into power. It's just incredible to see. The kind of the scandal is that you had Trump officials happily trying to censor material to try to protect Joe Biden from the consequences of his illicit activities.
Well, I mean, they used it for the impeachment. They used it for the Hunter Biden laptop. They've used this same mantra the entire time, and when Russia got played out, they turned to another blanket, conspiracy theory bucket that they pulled from, and it's all been the entire time so that nobody could actually get out to the public what was actually going on. And I mean, how they ran unaccountable. Even Matt said nobody holds these, like they're talking to each other so openly and brazenly because there's no accountability. So that's the next question everybody wants to know: what the hell is going to be done about this at all, if anything?
Well, the problem is, as Tom just said, these were Trump's people. So you got the Biden people now, you had the Trump people back then, and it made no difference. And what's sort of lost in all this, Matt had some really interesting emails today where Twitter folks were saying, well, they're asking for us to censor this guy and that guy, but they're actually sort of pro-Trump, so we probably shouldn't do that. The point is, you should never do that. No matter who wants it for whatever reason. It's unlawful. Just don't do it. I mean, it's unlawful for the government, not for Twitter. But the point that is sort of lost, I think, is that there were actual Trump people, and Tom just mentioned it, who advocated for this stuff. I mean, the State Department requests today that we just saw, that we got today, February 2020, March 2020, April 2020, this is Mike Pompeo. And he's asking for people to be censored, Russian disinformation, and just exactly the same playbook like the other side plays. So what hope is there if they're all playing the same playbook?
The same way that Ratcliffe was asked by Maria Bartiromo directly, you were the DNI at this time, and he basically proclaimed he didn't know that any of this was happening. I find that super hard to believe, but not completely unbelievable, to be honest, because all you need are a few of your higher ups telling you one thing and going and doing something else behind your back, and you've got a recipe for disaster there.
Well, I mean, Ray knew.
Of course, Ray knew.
I mean, that came out of Chan's deposition from the censorship case, that none of these FBI, well, I doubt that was actually true in the end, given the volume, but they needed permission from the 7th floor before pushing this stuff off to Twitter.
And understand that when we're talking about, like when Matt's talking about that, kind of outside group that's coming in, these are all NGOs and organizations receiving taxpayer dollars. And we learned this in that case, Missouri v. Biden. The reason why the Disinformation Governance Board was a thing was because CISA needed a way to almost be like a help desk for all of these censorship requests that were coming in from all over the government. And the social media companies were beginning to become overwhelmed with out a streamlined process to track everything. We saw a little bit of that today in Matt Taibbi's drop. So they wanted to form this Disinformation Governance Board to fund it, make it make it so that the American public knew it was happening, and could do nothing about it, and then have a more streamlined way to censor on social media. So that's still going on. I doubt they've stopped. The Missouri v. Biden case is looking for a temporary injunction on all of this, and that'll be decided here shortly after some of the depositions stop. But that's what the Disinformation Governance Board was. It was their help desk.
Yeah,
well, it continues. I mean, has Twitter turned off its portal? I don't know.
Not that we know, no. And coming back to this government point, right? Trump government, Trump administration, Trump officials. So Richard Grenell, who we all love, right? Here he was on April 30th, 2020. Trump had just said the virus came out of a lab, and he puts out a statement that the entire, I've just got it in front of me here, the entire intelligence community, blah, 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 concurs with the wide scientific consensus that COVID-19 was not man-made or genetically modified. This is April 2020. These are Trump's own people. Nothing against Grenell. I know he probably was misinformed or whatever, but that's the problem. The entire bureaucracy is hostile or was hostile, and well, if there's another Republican, it will again be hostile, and there just doesn't seem to be anything that can be done against that.
Well, especially if the victims aren't interested in vindicating their own rights. I mean, we're talking about this fight in the House today. The putative the putative speaker, Mr. McCarthy, he's been targeted for the last year and is still being targeted for jailing for daring to dispute or raise questions about the 2020 elections. And what has been his response? Nothing. You've seen these Twitter files come out over the last month. Has there been any significant response from the Republicans on it? Maybe Comer says he's interested in looking into it. But to me, this is kind of a crisis we're in, where we have every major agency. I don't know which ones haven't been involved. I guess we'll find out. The Department of Transportation or Interior Department figure out a way to get in on this. We're censoring millions of Americans in a way never seen before in American history. And there's this casual, oh, no big whoop from the Republican leadership. No wonder, not many people are terribly encouraged by what they think is going to happen in the next 2 years in the House.
Tom, one of the things that they found in Missouri v. Biden was that the CISA was coordinating with the Census Bureau to target Americans for censorship. So even the Census Bureau is involved in this at this point that we've learned through discovery. So it's insanity.
Well, and also, Tracy, the states were operating with CISA too, and that was clear today too. But we had seen separately. Well, you probably all know this California Secretary of State's case with D.C. Drano. They censored him. We found those documents. They got his account taken down. They caused a Judicial Watch YouTube video about the election to be taken down. Iowa, run by Republicans, tried to get our stuff taken down off of Twitter because they didn't like what we were saying about the way Iowa was maintaining its election rolls. So not only we have these federal agencies going in, but the states also had this direct input through these portals and CISA, as you're talking about, for so-called election misinformation. And as we can see, Twitter was kind of a resistor in some respects. The interesting thing about the Paul Sperry issue is that, Ciaramella is, those of you who don't know, he was the alleged CIA guy who helped impeach Trump with this Ukraine call information. And we weren't allowed to say his name on YouTube and Facebook. You couldn't even say it in Congress during the impeachment, but you could say it on Twitter. So, Twitter had, there was a little bit of an island of free speech on certain topics on Twitter, but, it became pretty clear when it came to election issues, they were clamping down. I was citing to a New York Times article, and they even censored that. So even the New York Times, draw through their censors.
Well, let's get back to Ciaramella here for a moment, because Matt had something on that today in his first thread. And what was interesting, well, it was all interesting, but there was this part where Adam Schiff makes these requests or demands for, and you mentioned Sperry, to get thrown off of Twitter, and he got his wish. The other guy that's thrown in there, this is really interesting. The names are sort of redacted, and then suddenly, sort of further down, the name Misko shows up. And I think that was just someone kind of forgot to redact it, maybe, or so. Sean Misko is part of the Ciaramella gang who were involved with the first impeachment. And this guy is on the line with Twitter, having people censored.
Well, as I noted, not successfully in Twitter, right? But successfully, I would think, in YouTube and Facebook, because I know those rules were, as I understood them, enforced, at least with respect to Ciaramella. And what Sperry's thesis was that Vindman and Ciaramella were working with this staffer in Schiff's office to try to kind of launder this classified information in a way as to protect all those involved from being prosecuted for laundering classified information and misusing it. And that's what Schiff wanted shut down, because he wanted the impeachment to be clean, and he didn't want to have his operation, his dirty tricks operation against Trump exposed, because it probably, frankly, there were criminal liability for all involved if Barr hadn't refused to investigate the release of classified information that was used to try to get Trump impeached. And they were trying to censor anyone on Twitter, and I know they did it on Facebook and YouTube, who mentioned Ciramello's name. I mean, an incredible development, don't you think? A CIA person his name's public, and we're not allowed to say it, even though he's involved in the impeachment of the president of the United States. Incredible. Now we know why.
Yeah, and if you remember, the only reason that Trump was able to somewhat escape that unscathed is because he moved that transcript to a different location than where Vindman could get his hands on it. If that hadn't happened, Schiff would have been able to lie with impunity without the public knowing what actually was said in that phone call. Brick, you have your hand up, and then Harold and Tom, you've had your hand up the whole time, but you've been speaking.
I'm sorry, I'll take it down. I'm a little slow on some of this.
Yeah, I just had one thing I wanted to say. Thank you for calling me, Tracy, and bringing me up here. I do appreciate it. It's been a great space, and I came into a little bit late. I can't wait to listen to the whole thing. So, one thing I just want to mention that, Tom was talking about how the Republican leadership in the House, or Republican people in the House, are not really making great inroads into what they're going to do with this information. I'm at least willing to give them the benefit of the doubt that they're involved in other things, like determining who their speaker is going to be, and who's going to be committee heads and things like that. After that's settled, if they haven't done anything in a week or two, I'm going to be more concerned. But I'll give them a little bit of rope there. And the other thing that I really want to talk about is, because I don't know what's already been mentioned, but I see this pattern, and I'm sure we all see this pattern, of the government increasingly becoming comfortable with going to Twitter about, take care of this, take care of that, we need this down, we need this down. I can't wait to see what the end game is when they see the writing on the wall that Elon Musk could buy Twitter. I can't wait to see those emails that are passed back and forth about, this is going to get out. I cannot wait to see the angst in those emails. That is going to be an incredibly fun chapter to read in this book.
Right, and
just quickly, I mean, if the Republicans haven't gotten it, they know what they're planning to do. The speaker is irrelevant to that. This decision about what to do in terms of the investigations has largely been set.
Right, and we didn't ask Matt. I don't recall anyone asking anyway about the DMs. I guess he has not had access, and I guess he wouldn't have access, and that would also throw up a lot of legal problems. But they're there, and they're not encrypted.
Yeah, I just like to get a picture of, I can just envision the type of panic, the slow realization that it's actually going to happen. The wind down, the lack of, basically you're going to see I would imagine you'd see maybe fewer requests. I mean, if you're going to see that, that's going to be kind of like a tacit admission that that maybe these requests are improper. If all of a sudden, a period of certain months, they were at X and now they're at half X or a fraction of X, what caused that? And if there's anything other than just the fact that the company is soon to be owned by Elon, that's going to be an interesting indicator.
It is. There's something else very interesting that was in the that ties in with that. That was in the in today's release by Matt, which is every single request sent in to ban people and to take down accounts and so on was prefaced with Tom, you'll love this, with the sentence: "This information is provided only for intelligence purposes in an effort to develop potential investigative leads." And that's their disclaimer. That's what they all put in there, the FBI and DHS and CIA and whoever, as a means of claiming that this has nothing to do with First Amendment, no breaches, no nothing. They're just trying to develop investigative leads. That's and then of course right below that it says, "Please ban these people."
We have Kyle Seraphin in here who's raising his hand now. He's one of the FBI whistleblowers who stepped forward to Project Veritas. Amazing guy, lots of insight. Kyle, go ahead, take the floor for a second.
Hey, Ant, you've honed in on something really important, I think, and this is what the FBI does. This is something that is now sort of looks like it's across the intelligence community. I hadn't seen it from other agencies, but when the FBI is about to violate the First Amendment and they're going to create a case file or a threat tag, or they're going to identify symbols that are First Amendment protected, they go ahead and they put a caveat up there in this one little paragraph, and it just says, we can't initiate an investigation based on First Amendment protected activity. And by the way, here's a bunch of stuff that we would do if we could, and we're going to do it anyway. And so there's something really, really unsettling about the idea that they are acknowledging that in fact they are doing something wrong. They are acknowledging the thing that they are violating, which is something that I've seen for a couple years now when it comes to looking at different types of counterterrorism cases, and they're going to just tread right past it because those are lip service only. And what we see that is when you're talking about intelligence community people, because intelligence communities, intelligence agencies in general, especially domestically, are not necessarily charged with doing operational work. But the problem is the FBI has the ability to do operational work because they have a law enforcement capacity, just like DHS. And so they're going to have one side of the house say, hey, you got to be careful of this thing because here's our caveat. And by the way, go do this. And then the operational side of the house goes and does it. And so you honed in on an excellent point there. Once you see them making that warning, it tells you that they know what they're doing is wrong and they're going to do it anyway. It's just really troubling stuff.
But that gives them enough plausible deniability to skirt any accountability that could potentially come. I think the problem that they're going to have now is that there were literal threats made via email about legislation or sanctions and things like that if they didn't act in a certain way.
Well, I mean, Tom said it earlier in one of the spaces that it's like gangster government. This is what he had maybe a slightly different terminology, but I totally agree. This is like a shakedown. It's a protection racket. It's you hold something over the head of the agency that you want to come and bend to your will, or the private company rather. And as I've said in a couple of spaces now at this point, it's not common for companies to give up information voluntarily. They generally sign on behalf of either their customers or their user base. That's what's most common. And for you to see the opposite of that happening, where you have full compliance, and obviously it took some coercion, some movement to get them there. And I think that's what today's drop showed us, at least in the first part. And the second shows that it was effective. But, it's just not common that the companies bend over and hand things over to the government because they don't have to. That's the whole point. They have to go. There's a process, and people we're ignoring that.
Well, and that material they placed on that source information that doesn't protect them. It just highlights the fact that it's Privacy Act protected material, or certainly material that typically isn't shared with private entities in order to take action against the individual. There's nothing comparable, at least in my understanding of modern federal law enforcement, where this was taking place, where the FBI was casually investigating, countless Americans and then asking someone to punish them through censorship and sharing the results of those investigations in this casual way. There's a real, that's a real crisis in terms of the operations of the FBI that has to be addressed. And, I don't pretend to be the smartest guy in the room here. It's just that I'm concerned that there's this obliviousness in this city to what we're seeing here. And, we're losing our country and losing our republic when we see law enforcement agencies being used for political purposes like this at the federal level. I mean, that used to distinguish us, or at least we'd like to believe it distinguished us in the sense we didn't see it as directly as we see it here. But to see this being done so plainly with so little reaction from the establishment class is exceedingly disturbing.
No, you're absolutely right. And the point you mentioned is so important about here. A lot of folks have asked me over the last few weeks while these files have been coming out, like, well, why isn't anyone complaining about France or Germany, India, whatever, all these countries who also petition or coerce Twitter, whatever the word is? And the answer is because they don't have a First Amendment. There's nothing in those countries to stop the government from doing that. The United States is the sole country that has that. And that's so, so important. And it kind of doesn't have it anymore, because we all heard Matt earlier talking about it, how it's just they didn't care. They didn't even care about hiding it. They just went ahead and did whatever they wanted to do. You know, Adam Schiff writes in and says, I want Paul Sperry thrown off. Okay, Paul Sperry's thrown off.
I mean, everyone
So-
was making requests for accounts to get banned and censored, and Twitter was doing it. So, I mean, look at it from their angle. You know, if I worked for the FBI, I would just keep asking too. Why not?
I look at it even more important than free speech. If you talk about the COVID aspect of this, it was lives at stake that were taken, and that it reaches a whole new level when it gets to that. You know, I think it's much bigger than just a political attack, Tom. It's really the unelected bureaucratic intelligence community versus the American citizen who has a right to know. And they're taking that away from us because they're censoring the people that are telling. And so that's the biggest problem. It's really an unelected class ruling the country with impunity, and nobody in an elected capacity with the balls to step up and do anything about it.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah,
Undead.
I call it not unconstitutional. I call it anti-constitutional. This is what we're seeing. Anti-constitutional action by the government.
Tom, can I ask you a question?
Sure.
I've been on some spaces with you, but I'm just curious, what's your opinion of ex-CIA officers being the head of the trust and safety at Google and Facebook?
Well, does it make a difference given what we're seeing? I mean, are they?
I mean,
you
I'm
know,
just-
you have. It looks like the FBI effectively running trust and safety on politically sensitive topics.
Yeah, but
So the
being,
fact you have former employees there kind of makes it a little easier, probably, in terms of they kind of share the same approach. You know, but to me, it's the relationship with the government and what the government's doing there. You know, but it raises another question too. If the CIA guys or the former guys know exactly what the government would want to be censored, they don't need to talk to them anymore, right? They can set the algorithms up. I mentioned COVID on YouTube, on Facebook. It gets the post is vandalized. I mentioned the 2020 elections. They vandalized the post with a link to Wikipedia about the 2020 elections. So they don't need the government to tell them what to do anymore. They've got that system in place, and I'm sure that's helped. That's made more efficient and direct by having former government employees help them run it.
were you on earlier when Matt was on, and I think he made a comment that there was a ton of applications or requests from former intelligence community people to get hired at Twitter?
Oh, I didn't hear that. Well, that's not surprising. I mean,
Yeah.
they retire young, as Hans knows, and they've got a lot more to give.
Yeah.
In terms of work.
Tom, I heard you speak a little bit earlier about Iowa, and we have a Republican government here. That's mostly true. Was your pushback coming from the Attorney General?
No, the Secretary of State's office. We said that they had too many counties that were had dirty voting rolls. We said 8 counties. They said 5, and they wanted all of our stuff taken down.
That's really interesting.
Yeah, Republican Secretary of State.
So
I mean, we've had less problems with New York than Iowa, and on issues like that. It's incredible.
I just want to kind of take up something that Tracy mentioned a moment ago, which is so important. Do you all remember Stella Emanuel, the doctor? And so she came out pretty early in COVID, and she said she treated hundreds, thousands, or whatever of people, and with hydroxychloroquine, and it worked as long as you used it early. And again, I don't know, because I haven't treated anyone, because I'm not that kind of doctor. But soon after, she was chucked off. And now it appears that, that may have been right, which takes us back to the whole point of these people were thrown off for just adding an opinion. And one thing that Matt mentioned earlier, which I guess we haven't discussed yet, is that we haven't heard about any of that yet. The Fauci files are still missing. And I think Matt mentioned that, which was very interesting too, is that there was a different stream of information or coercion, whatever you want to call it, coming into Twitter from the usual one. So the one that he's been following is the Elvis Chan one, the FBI one. So Elvis Chan was sort of the aggregator of all the requests from government to Twitter to do things, to ban people, to whatever. But the COVID stuff doesn't show up there. So that's something that I'm still looking forward to. And, Elon has mentioned it many times. And I just wonder, what there is there.
There's going to be a lot that, puts Fauci in a very bad place due to the perjury he's alleged. We're going to find out. I'm sure he's committed in his deposition by saying he doesn't do anything with social media. He has no idea what's going on with social media, and that he was out of that. And that's why I keep saying usually, and I think Tom can attest to this, we find this stuff out and then there are lawsuits filed. We have the benefit right now of an ongoing lawsuit with a brave ass judge who's not ruled against the plaintiffs in it, at least at once at all so far, among this entire time. That's ongoing right now, that encompasses all social media platforms, not just Twitter, on these very topics that we're getting this information on right now. And the reason why Elvis Chan was deposed in that lawsuit is because he was given up by Facebook. Facebook is the one that provided that name to the attorneys for Missouri and Louisiana and the other parties in that lawsuit. It's interesting the way these three worlds or four worlds are combining and weaving together, but they basically control the internet. All of them control the internet together. I mean, we're not paying much attention to Google, and they had complained about Google being a distant third in the questioning on Capitol Hill, when I would argue that search deboost is probably the most powerful tool. And I'm sure Dr. Levine, who came out, I think that was his name, that came out before the 2020 election about what Google was doing, would agree.
Yeah, the the thing about Facebook is it's an absolute shambles. I mean, I'm laughing here, but I really shouldn't be. So Facebook accidentally dropped the name Elvis Chan in a phone call with it was either Schmidt or Landry, those two attorney generals who are running this case. And so these attorney generals were like, oh my God, now we have a name. This is the guy who's doing everything. And as soon as they piped up, I think they issued a subpoena for this guy. Facebook's lawyers sent a letter saying, no, Elvis Chan, got nothing to do with Elvis Chan or whatever. But if you read that, it's a 2-page letter. If you read it very carefully, they're not really denying it at all. But to a non-lawyer, it sounds like they're saying we never mentioned Elvis Chan, but they don't actually deny it. It's a thing of beauty, sort of, to a lawyer to read that letter. So that tells you, and you're absolutely right, Tracy, they messed up. We were never supposed to know about Elvis Chan. And this was recently. This was in like September, October, and he's now become such a focal point of this entire operation.
And we have his deposition.
Well, and as some folks have pointed out on Twitter, the Baltimore office was also involved in some of the censorship operation, and they were the office most closely linked to the so-called Biden investigation because they're providing support for the U.S. attorney in Delaware. But to go back to the COVID issues that are being, that the question was asked about, I think you're going to find a kind of an unholy mix of conflicts of interest here, because the companies, got a lot of money. My impression is from the government for advertising, but they also gave money to the government to run COVID related advertising. So they had a business relationship in addition to the censorship relationship. And and I know I was targeted. I think I was taken down on a COVID-related pretext on January 8th, 2021, or thereabouts. And so you really can't separate the COVID censorship from the other censorship that was taking place, because as far as the left was concerned, we're all part of that same ugly mix. Anti-vaxxers or COVID. You don't believe it. Your election deniers. You're all part of the same, and you're all going to get censored one way or another. And they didn't make much distinction, and they used one to get at. So I was punished for my COVID tweet when they really didn't like what I was saying about election integrity.
Tom, you were chucked off for 6 months. You suffered, like your career, not being able to talk, not being able to get your message out, and so on. What's the remedy? Are you pursuing any remedy, or is it all Bivens, like no remedy? What's your take on that?
Well, I don't know if I could. I don't know individually whether I could pursue any remedies. They took my tweet down, and they told me I could go back in when I took it down. They locked me out and said I could go back in when I took my tweet down, and I didn't do it for 10 months. But the damage continues. I mean, we've sued YouTube under the Ku Klux Klan Act, which is the civil rights law that covers this collusion between, the state actors and anyone else to deprive us of our civil rights. So to the degree information like that comes out about me directly or anyone else, there's potential litigation that could arise from that. And, the challenge is that the Justice Department isn't going to do anything. Maybe some states attorney generals will creatively look at this and try to get some enforcement action against the companies and the entities that were behind this massive, what I call the Great Suppression.
Right. Can I just say one thing about, on Elvis Chan and, on sort of FOIA? I know Twitter is not FOIA-able, but, it would be nice if we had something like that. Elvis Chan, interestingly
It is basically
enough,
FOIA-able with Elon in charge
exactly.
now.
So let's just spell it out what we're onto here. Elvis Chan was actually located or found by our friend Walker Fire a long time ago, years ago. And then he came up again in the Sussman case. So we found his name in the Sussman case as one of the sort of major players. And it turns out you all recall that Sussman brought this fake Alpha Bank stuff to the FBI, to his friend Baker. And then Baker passed it to some cyber people, and the cyber people laughed it off. This is a total joke. I mean, they immediately saw this was all fake. And guess who the FBI's leadership then farmed it out to, because they weren't happy with the response from the FBI's local people in Washington, the cyber people. They gave it to Elvis Chan, same Elvis Chan. So it would be fantastic. And I've seen so much on from what Matt has done already where Elvis comes up. I mean, he comes up all the time. It would be absolutely fantastic to have absolutely everything from Elvis Chan, anything with his name on it, and just to kind of forensically pick that apart. So just putting that out there as a wish list.
He was really, like, you'd think he'd be a higher up or a higher position.
Now he was the Forrest Gump, right? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's just interesting to me that they used this one guy for everything. Kyle, do they do that often?
It's pretty bizarre because he's the GS-15, which is not really, he's not in the upper echelons of things, but to get to that point, he would have had to move back and forth and done some time in DC. So I'm sure he was a unit chief somewhere there, and maybe in the cyber unit, and then ended up back in San Francisco where he was comfortable. I had friends that were sitting in meetings that he would host, and he would hold them with like a high level executive at Reddit, and they were telling me the same stuff. Like before these drops started coming down, that he was giving the wink and the nod right away. It's like, yeah, we can't do censorship, but if it violates your policy, you guys should definitely do it. And he was saying that in front of hundreds of FBI employees who know better. And it didn't even faze him. It didn't even slow him down to say that and do that in front of this kind of audience. So for whatever reason, he felt very comfortable being in that space and operating that way. And like I said, I've had a number of people that were in these meetings with Reddit and others that were all tech companies that said the same sort of thing. So it's bizarre. But you would expect he would have been at a higher level and maybe just to be holding that kind of position. But he was also in the field office and he was in direct contact. So I don't know.
Can you speak to Babbel for a minute?
Yeah, as far as the social media exploitation tool that they've got.
Yeah.
So the FBI does a lot of what's called OSINT, right? Open source information or open source intelligence. And they're always constantly looking for ways to digest huge amounts of data and do it in a way that's somehow of value to the law enforcement space. So some of it's predictive the kind of pre-crime stuff that we're trying to see. Is this a threat? Is this a pending threat? Is this going to, melt down and cause some sort of federal harm or whatever, local harm, somebody be an active shooter? But then the other piece of it is can we, gather intelligence on movements, whether it be, fill in the blank group. And I have to imagine that things like Proud Boys and stuff like that, we're all kind of tagged in these things. But essentially, it's a search engine that runs across all these different types of social media platforms. It was designed for the intelligence community specifically, and my numbers are going to run together now. But I want to say they have like a $27 million outstanding contract, of which maybe it's $1,000 a license, something to that effect. So they've got a handful of licenses. I've had people tell me that it's not nearly as powerful as what they used to use, which is kind of funny. They used to use things like Data Miner and some of the other tools out there, and they said they've got tools like Zero Fox, which somebody snuck past the censors and allowed them to name their software that. But there's a whole bunch of different sort of tools the Bureau is constantly buying access to. They're getting licensed to, and they're trolling across social media. They're trolling across websites and people's publishing, and then they're being used by intelligence analysts, and those people are trying to concoct the story. There was another thing that was called Social Spider that I recall, which was allowing us to touch people's social media pages without them seeing that we were accessing it. So even if they were private, we could take a look at that. And some of that tells me that they must have had some cooperation with the companies that were actually running these platforms as well. Yeah, I just didn't have the sophistication at the time when I was working CI to actually know what they were, what that actually involved. But there's
Well,
no question
doesn't it occur to you that was pretty low rent activity they were engaged in? I mean, if you're targeting as average citizens whose speech you're trying to police, you really don't need any high quality crawlers to do that, right? Other than to make sure they get the material. But if your goal is to, you would hope those tools are being used to kind of break codes terrorists use to communicate on social media platforms, as opposed to kind of root out speech that's offensive to the political class.
Yeah, so by the time I saw them using this stuff, like that, I was actually aware of, like the ones I had seen when I was working CI was that they were very targeted to an individual. So if we had ID'd a specific account or a person, we'd find out what their accounts were. We want to look at what their social media looks like. That was part of like an individual investigation. That's pretty targeted stuff. That's pretty specific. The crawling type programs, I do agree with you that it's a much lower threat level than what you'd expect. And so I didn't have to do that, thank God. That wasn't something that was tasked of me, but I saw it from the periphery. I was, located next to the national security squads that did the same kind of thing. And what had occurred to me is that it looked like they were basically trying to confirm whatever the narrative that came out of headquarters. Intel people want to be right. They have a vested interest in looking good by doing that. So it's like, well, if we forecast that, militia violent extremists or domestic, white supremacists are going to be the biggest threat to the homeland this year, it'd be really good if that was true. And the only way that you can prove that is by going out and digging up all these white supremacists or militia violent extremists or whatever the hell it is that you're trying to ID. And so this is the self-fulfilling prophecy of working in an intel agency where they have a vested interest in trying to make sure that they're correct. So they have the tools to be able to go out there and find that threat. And it may not be apparent to the average person out there that it exists. And it may be very fringe. I would argue that it's complete BS because I didn't see it. They didn't materialize in the operational realm when I was out doing the surveillance on these types of people. That wasn't legit. But that's what I think they were using the tools to do. So I agree with you.
Let me try and bring it back to something else that Matt said. I was just kind of trying to scribble down a few things, and he said so much. As I said earlier, I'm going to have to go back and listen to the whole thing. You could probably write a whole article just about all the news he broke. He said back in 2017, the U.S. intelligence community basically forced their way through the door where they forced Twitter to change its policy, and from then onwards, they had this basically this right to get anyone banned. And Matt said there wasn't any process, there wasn't any proof or anything, no evidence or anything like that. All they had to say is this is Russian sponsored misinformation. Boom, they're gone. And he had I think he had a tweet where he actually had a screenshot of that policy changing in 2017 through coercion, Mark Warner, people like that. What's the remedy? I mean, Kyle or Tom, I mean, what can we do about that?
It's really ugly right now because the people that theoretically would be policing the FBI is your Office of Inspector General, maybe a special counsel could go do investigative work, but then they're going to turn around and they're going to refer prosecution to DOJ. So, I mean, do we have maybe a possibility of a special prosecutor coming in and running it? But you're still working mostly with people that are connected to that same entity. I mean, it's the hand in the glove. It's like it's almost an unsolvable problem without just disbanding the damn thing.
Well, or prohibiting funding of that type of activity. I mean, that's kind of one way that Congress can step up immediately. And the challenge that we're facing is because of the corrupt omnibus that was passed. My general understanding is that the funding leverage is erased or removed, practically speaking, for the next 10 months.
Well, and they gave the FBI a raise, right? I mean, they gave them
right. So they fully funded
$600
the FBI. There's been no restrictions on their activities as disclosed over the last few weeks. This is what I'm talking about, the obliviousness. Who stood, even among our friends, to try to stop this in the last funding battle? No one. And I'm sorry, we shouldn't have to do all the thinking here. I guess maybe we do, but that's the
You're right.
challenge of self-government. We can't just presume someone else is going to do it. But
Right. Where was
inexcusable.
Where was Rand Paul? Where were the guys that have repeatedly beat the drum about FISA abuse? Where were they in this? Nobody stood up. You're right, and that pisses me off to the nth degree.
Maybe I should have made some calls to highlight the opportunities there. And I guess I guess to the degree there are folks who communicate with members of Congress and other public officials, I encourage you, don't presume they got it or it's common sense. They don't need to hear from me. No. They're busy people. They've got a lot going on. I mean, you asked me initially about the binder, right? It's like, I don't know. What do you mean about the binder? Oh, okay. Now I know what you mean about it. But the point is, there's a lot going on. They need all the help they can get. And, if you think there needs to be attention drawn to a particular issue, you need to take advantage of whatever communications you have with them to make that happen. Because in my experience, you'd be, to use the trite phrase, you'd be surprised, or maybe not surprised, how uncommon common sense is on some of these issues.
So, Tom, how often does that happen? That the court orders them to hand over the binder or whatever, and they just ignore it? Like, all the time?
In this case, if the deadline is December 31st, it's a holiday, it's over the weekend, so we'll probably get it this week. And it's one thing to order the material over. The question is what they turn over ultimately, right? So they have rights under the law to presumably try to redact material that they find that they think they can get away with redacting, and we would be able to challenge that in court. So it's going to be interesting to see what they turn over and what they don't turn over.
Well, Hans, I have to jump because I have to get up really early for my podcast. But thank you guys so much for the opportunity tonight, and thanks for hosting this space. It's been fantastic. Looks like we might have some work to do. I'm super excited to jump in and dig in if Matt hands us over some stuff to look at. And God bless all you guys. Keep fighting.
Thanks,
Tracy.
Thank you, Tracy.
And Tom, we have experts at figuring out the redactions, in particular, Fool Nelson, Walker Fire. Fool is the guy who figured out Sierra Mella's name. Walker Fire figured out a whole number of people. Danchenko, of course, kind of teamwork. So if you get the binder, please share.
Oh, yeah. I mean, typically what Judicial Watch does with documents, we take a look to see, we kind of do what Taibbi does, but we also release all the other documents, which is the challenge here, is that they're kind of looking at material. There's other material that they haven't shared with us yet that sometimes has a lot of good information. And so I would encourage, Musk and his team to err on the side of disclosure here and just get all the information out as soon as they're able. And, it doesn't mean you can't have some folks kind of, do a once over for you and present a story as best you're able. But you really should provide additional information, especially given the large quantity of information they evidently have. And, they can do that. You have the lawyer, you pay the lawyers to make sure no one's name is being improperly released or someone's privacy is being invaded improperly or in a way that would cause some risk or harm. But that to me is relatively easy to do. Just get the information out and do, as Hans is suggesting, some crowdsource type reporting.
he should use you guys. Today he replied to someone, Elon did, and said that he was happy for stuff to be released as long as junior employees were redacted, as well as sort of personal information, phone numbers, that kind of stuff of anyone else. That's not difficult. And if it's, sure, why should he pay for it? I mean, he's already done so much, but I'm sure there's plenty of people who do it for free.
Yeah, I mean, Judicial Watch could do it. He could bring in, a law firm just to get it done for him as well. I don't. The reporters, they come in with an approach, right? And they may find something of interest that or may not find something of interest that is very important to many others. And I think there are a lot of victims here, and including very prominent ones. And if I were them, for instance, I would focus on, how did these big accounts get censored, and really, really focus like a laser on that. And then from there, track these others who were wrongly censored by the government as well, or by their allies in Twitter. But I don't have an insight into what the documents are, how the documents have been handled and such, and how they're kept and all that. And but this is not a unusual issue to do a document search. The government does it every day. How hard could it be?
Yeah, no, I totally agree. My fear is that once Matt and all the others, I mean, luckily, to be honest, Matt said we've got a long ways to go. I was so happy to hear that. So it's not like he's done. But once that's over, I totally agree with you. I want to see the underlying documents.
Yeah, and as long as Musk is personally committed, his company is not, is in the business of doing what it does, right? And document production for the public is not an ordinary business practice. So this is a pretty extraordinary set of circumstances. And of course, the left is attacking him. They want to jail him in retaliation for this. So he's going to be facing a lot of pressure. And to the degree folks are listening, I would demand that, for instance, members of Congress, come out and support him. I don't know if I agree with Musk and everything he believes. That's not the point. Same thing with Trump. It's not. The point is he being abused by the government in retaliation for First Amendment protected activity? And the answer is yes. I mean, Trump was a crime victim in dramatic ways, and I think we're seeing indications that Musk is one as well.
Yeah, with his cars as well. Did you all see that everyone gets a $7,500 tax credit on an EV, but not a Tesla?
Well, the Federal Trade Commission sent his company 2 nasty letters a few weeks ago or a month or 2 ago, right? Demanding some information about this this ridiculous consent decree issue. The President of the United States, his first press conference after he, won his election based on attacking other Americans and threatening him, directed a security review of Musk's operations. That used to be impeachable, right? But that's pretty. He's a billionaire, but the government doesn't think in terms of money; they think in terms of force. And if they come after him, all the money in the world's not going to protect him from being thrown in jail. If the Biden DOJ decides to, reanalyze or reevaluate law in a way to, put him on the dock.
Hey, Hans, before we go any further, Ryan's been holding his hand up for a while. I know he said he only had one question.
Yeah,
so maybe we can let him in. And then we have a couple other people that came in, Sphinx and Willie, so and we can get back to wherever you're headed.
Just have one quick question. And actually, Kyle, it's for you, and I really appreciate what you're doing. But I had a quick question, and to whatever extent you could answer it, I would appreciate it. One of the things that I've come across over the last several months in some of the FOIA work that I do is a series of investigative referrals that come down from DOJ and the FBI through DARPA and then ultimately to various third-party contractors. But as an initial matter, I'm a little bit confused and a little bit concerned, I guess, as to why investigative taskings are flowing from the FBI or DOJ at all to the Department of Defense, and the ones that I've seen specifically go to DARPA. But for domestic investigations, is there anything you can speak to as to the frequency that cyber-related investigations, what frequency those taskings might be sent to the Department of Defense, and what the rationale might be behind some of that?
I'm totally not familiar with that sort of work. So the only thing I can think of is that it would be that they're sending CI concerns that are CI investigations. So we used to deal with DoD entities on a fairly regular basis, sometimes for just basic criminal matters, and sometimes for more sort of espionage or counterproliferation or that type of thing. If there was somebody moving materials or technologies that they shouldn't be, or they were exposing them. So that's the only thing I could really think of that would make any sense for that kind of tasking to go over there, just because they would be the owners of maybe they would have the personnel that was involved or something to that effect. But without a little bit more information, I'm not really sure.
Yeah, I don't think that's what it is, but that is a question that I'm curious in, and I appreciate you taking a shot at least. Fool or Hans, I don't know if you guys want to jump back in.
Oh, sure. I don't know if Hans is going anywhere after Tom's statements, but I know I cut you off a little bit there, Hans. Were you heading anywhere?
No. I've said so much. Why don't you've taken over now? Why don't you go ahead?
Oh, I got nothing. We just have a couple other people request to be speakers, so I figure we can get them to ask some questions. I know Sphinx was first.
Yeah, just so you know, Sphinx says she couldn't hear anything. She may need to be reinvited. She sent me a message and said she couldn't tell who was talking anymore, so you may need to reinvite.
Sphinx, can you unmute yourself at all? All right, we'll move on to Willie then. Willie? Come on, man. Let's hear that English drawl of yours. All right, Willie's not there either.
Can you hear me?
Oh, there he is. Yeah, I got you.
No, I'm literally just gonna share unrequited undead Poyer's right is give Sango. That's it. No, he's doing the main work on like Poyer requests and yeah, maybe you can put some money his way, go for it.
Oh, thank you, Willie. Yeah, I mean, it's not a big deal, guys, but try to continue fighting for documents. That's all. So appreciate it, though.
Yeah, Ryan's been fighting a lot of fights in Georgia Tech, trying to get documents and public information stuff that's actually owed to us. So, and he's running up a lot of bills. So that'd be very nice if you could contribute to that. He's fighting a fight that, I mean, only people like Tom Fitton have really as private endeavors. So that'd be great if you could contribute to that.
Yeah, and just so you know, we've been trying to track the Twitter files as best as I don't know, reasonably can, but I hope we're doing it, and following up with appropriate FOIAs. So it's all pending out there. So, one thing we're not going to do is wait on Congress to get to the bottom of this. And as we said, a lot of this has already been, shown to be taking place through other documents that are already out there. But it needs to be expanded into what Facebook is doing and Google is doing, because as I suggested to my question to Matt Taibbi, for those who are listening, the impact of censorship by those entities are exponentially greater in terms of the sheer numbers of people it impacts than Twitter. Twitter is small potatoes compared to Facebook in terms of numbers. Now, Twitter has kind of an outsized influence on the political class and media class here, but in terms of everyday users, Facebook is exponentially greater. So the censorship there is much more grave in terms of its impact, and maybe whoever the next speaker is will put it on front and center.
Tom, you touched on Google, and that's something that needs to be expanded on. as an IT professional, I can't help but bring up the fact that Google has a contract with the National Security Agency for cloud storage, not to mention the fact that Google logs all these search items and is categorizing people as they search and is building that into a database of people to watch, monitor, and ultimately suppress. But beyond that, how many people do you know have a Gmail account? Everything that you put into that account and that comes into that account is the same thing. Google's the elephant in the room.
Yeah, it's a significant entity, and this is why they're. I kind of run hot and cold. Obviously, investigation is our bread and butter, but we sue to stop bad things from happening too. And I think that Congress is kind of needs to make it clear that they want to investigate, but not for world without end, amen, but just yet enough in order to get some accountability done. And a lot of this is they already know what happened, and the question that voters should have is, what are you going to do about it?
I think
Are they going to, the
Google.
agencies, are they going to be prohibited from communicating with the social media companies, except in the most limited of circumstances? Are they going to pressure the Justice Department to begin special counsel prosecutions? Or are they going to decimate the budget of the FBI?